welcome to Growing Joy.
Thanks for having me.
You've had such an interesting history in horticulture and such a cool career. Can you tell us how you become the, I guess we call it plants man that you are today?
Sure. I think it started before my career. I grew up in New England, and my parents were back to the landers, kind of hippies, boomers. So we grew up in the woods, and we had a 70-acre property
Oh my goodness.
just in the middle of nowhere. And we made maple syrup, and we had a vegetable garden and an ornamental garden. My grandparents were gardeners, so I just sort of steeped in it growing up.
Wow.
And then but I never really thought of it as a career path. The thing that really brought me to doing it professionally was in college meeting a professor who was a plant ecologist, and he worked in the coastal prairies of Northern California. And a few days before graduating, he invited me to spend the summer with him in Bodega Bay, which is where they filmed The Birds, and it's another kind of remote place, but very different from New England where I grew up. And so I spent a whole summer just with him learning Latin names of plants and researching how to restore these amazing coastal prairies, which are just absolutely beautiful. And
And were
from
you
there,
an ecology major? What did you go to college for?
I was a biology major, and
Okay.
I had kind of started to learn about plants through my work with him, but really wanted to be a marine ecologist at that time. And but I spent the summer with him as this great opportunity, and came back to the East Coast and wanted to get a job at the Boston Aquarium. And so I volunteered there, and then I found out that I don't like working in aquariums because it was like it was mostly chopping up fish guts and feeding it to
My
into the
gosh.
tanks. And I just would do that a couple days a week as a volunteer and also working. And then I realized, I kind of like plants better. And so from then on, it's just been one thing after another. I spent time at a place called the Native Plant Trust, which is a native plant garden and organization just outside of Boston. Then I spent some time at Harvard, a couple of different jobs there in the plant world before moving to California, and then here into the Northwest now. So it's been a wonderful time, and it just keeps sort of getting deeper and more inspired by the natural world and by connecting people to plants and to gardening and to nature.
Yeah, that's two extremely different climates you've been involved with and extremely different natural areas.
Yeah, well, now it's three, honestly, because it's the Northeast, the Southern California, and the Northwest. But here in the Northwest, I almost think of it as like a hybrid of the Northeast and Southern California. So it sort of feels like a homecoming. I've been up here now about a year and a half. And when I got here to the Northwest, it had those sort of familiar like seasonal forest elements of New England, but it also had the western landscapes and the big mountains and also the dry summers and the wet winters. So it sort of felt like, in a weird way, this homecoming to a place that I'd never lived before.
Mm.
But yeah, all different climates and different horticultural styles and palettes. But the through line through all of it has been an interest in conservation and native plant gardening and naturalistic design and environmental horticulture. All those things have kind of been present throughout the beginning, in all these different landscapes across the country.
Is there a particular lesson that you learned about that in each climate? Did each climate like reveal something about the importance of this naturalistic design, ecological horticulture to you?
I'm sure it did. If I can articulate it cleanly, that's another question. But I can add a few things that I sort of picked up along the way. I mean, just growing up in New England in the forest, succession was such a kind of present aspect of our life. Like we were there's some meadows on my parents' property, so we were constantly having to, cut saplings out, and we'd turn them into firewood, and just the forest sort of reclaiming any open space was just an ever-present kind of part. So I think like it's interesting, like that element of nature just sort of marching along and having its own presence was really like formative growing up. And then when I moved to Boston, the ecology of altered environments became really present. And so living in the urban Northeast,
Yeah.
you have like the tree of heaven forests and all these kind of invasive species that have sort of taken over. And that became very, that I think that was a lesson I took from there, that in many parts of the world, the ecology has been pretty messed up by everything we've done to the earth. And so, and some of that, is due to us gardeners who made bad decisions about, bringing in
Non-natives.
bringing in the wrong plants at times, and yes, particularly invasive non-natives. And I'm thinking about like Japanese knotweed, which was a garden plant, and now it's like every river in the Northeast is just like choked with this
Hmm.
thing. So that was a big, a big kind of thing to just think about and grapple with. And when I lived there, this is like the late 2000s. There was this big conversation going about native versus non-native, and are non-native plants as bad as people say they are, and what are the benefits of these plants that will live in really degraded environments. So I was really interested in that at that time, but still, kind of on the native plant camp. And also, I would say that part of my life was when I really got into the idea of like collecting and kind of curating biodiversity through gardens. So at Harvard, the Arnold Arboretum, where I worked, it just has this incredible collection of like, plants from all over the world, and all these rare wild trees from maples and ash, all sorts of things from all over the world. So this idea of like gardeners sort of being collectors became a big focus at that time too. And then in California, I think the thing that I had various jobs there and different experiences in each. One of the things that I most recently worked on during my time at the Theodore Payne Foundation was how the economy of a region and the economy of a city really is integrated into its natural environment, and like the knowledge of the industry and like the ecosystem of nurseries and landscape companies and home gardeners, like how that all works together in a way that can create, what the environment will look like. Like what is the urban environment comes from this sort of relationship between all these different forces, cultural forces and economic forces. And in Los Angeles, I was really working hard to try to kind of shift the industry taste, I would say.
Hmm.
And so that kind of human aspect of what are the actual botanical outcomes at the end, that's probably what I really focused on there. And there's just so much interesting stuff to talk about in that space. And then here in the Northwest, like I said, it's been sort of a homecoming to just the beauty of the natural environment, because the Northwest
Hmm.
is just mind-blowingly beautiful. I see bald eagles almost every day, and river otters, and it's pretty amazing. We're at Bloedel Reserve. We're just across the water from Seattle, but it's really a world away. There's so much wildlife, and the forests are so beautiful. So kind of integrating that, and then taking the message of Bloedel and the unique style of Bloedel, which is this very, very regionally specific kind of Northwest style that's very curated in some ways, but it's also very open to natural processes and sustaining and supporting habitat and the native ecology of
Hmm.
our region. And then that's kind of coupled with some of the founding visions of Bloedel, the gardens at Bloedel, which is this approach that's kind of focused on the individual experience and the emotional relationships that somebody's going to have in the natural environment, which and also health and wellness, which is a big aspect of what we do. So yeah, every region has kind of added a different layer of thought, and you might have been asking more like horticulturally, what did I learn in each region?
No, no,
Which,
that's
yeah.
you answered exactly right. And I think particularly when you were talking about your time in LA or in California, when you really think about the footprint that all the gardeners in an area have versus the footprint of a local park, or if you're lucky and you have a botanical garden in your area or a preserve, gardeners really do have the opportunity to shift the needle for
Mhm.
the ecosystem if we all work together in tandem to kind of restore what we've messed up. And I think that's a really interesting, I've never thought about it that way, but like all of the footprints of all of the gardeners really do outweigh whatever your local parks are for the majority of the cities and towns across the country, obviously with probably Bainbridge Island being a exemption because Bloedel is so incredible. But that's really fascinating. So, by the way, my cousins grew up on Bainbridge. So I grew up visiting Bainbridge. It is like paradise. It's this like little known secret
It's really beautiful here.
off the
Yeah.
coast of Seattle. I've been to the Northwest Flower and Garden Show 3 times now, and I just grow increasingly jealous of what you guys can grow and how your
Hmm.
climate is so conducive to just having the most gorgeous gardens out there. It's interesting. I'm in South Florida now, and it's like you go to the big box stores and you see them selling hydrangeas in the middle of the summer because they sell
Hmm.
hydrangea everywhere else. But like that hydrangea is gonna shrivel up so quick when you plant it here in South Florida. And it is that collaboration between the garden center and the gardener as well, that like we need to be given the plant palettes that can
Hmm.
support our local biodiversity, not at a large scale.
Totally. And I want to answer or respond to that, but you were mentioning how you're jealous of the Northwest, and
Hmm.
come here in like mid-November, early December, and you might not
Right.
feel quite the same way because it's pretty rainy and it's pretty gray. Though it's sunny and beautiful today, and we're in mid-February, so
Hmm.
we're having a mild winter. Yeah, I think the supply chain of plants is another really important aspect of this conversation. So it's obviously the footprint of gardeners and their tastes, but that supply chain. When I was at Theodore Payne, we ran a retail nursery, and they still have a pretty medium-sized retail nursery, fairly big for native plants. It's probably the biggest native plant retailer in the LA area, and that was a huge bottleneck is just the availability of plants. I think it's gotten better over the years. There's more native plant nurseries and there's more availability of, if not
I think
native.
the gardeners have pushed for it. We've said this is what we want, so the stores are responding.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think one of the problems of, there's many reasons why a lot of our landscapes are, in my opinion, slightly lackluster, like home gardens, commercial landscapes, whatever they might be. I think part of it is a lot of people are shopping at box stores, and these box stores they're not necessarily at that regional scale of specificity that like a local, small nursery of super dedicated, passionate gardeners is going to be. And so that, the small nurseries, the mom and pops are so important to
Hmm.
good horticulture and moving the kind of aesthetic of forward for gardens in the US. And I think that supply chain issue is one that still needs a ton of work. And we were always sort of grappling with, like, do you try to create relationships with these giant retailers and these mega corporate interests as smaller organizations and as people who are like hardcore horticulture people?
Mm.
And I can't say there was ever a satisfying answer to that. I think the world would be a better place if you could go into your Home Depot and pick up native plants to your region. Is that going to happen? I don't know. What are the other
Yeah.
issues associated with that? I'm not sure, but yeah.
I live for going to my local garden center down the street from me. I moved from zone 5B to zone 10B, so it was an enormous change
Oh
in
yeah.
climate. I was a
Yeah.
really established gardener in zone 5B and quickly came down here realizing, wow, I'm a beginner. Like, wow, I'm killing all the
Hmm.
plants again. And my favorite thing is to go to the local mom and pop shop and go in and be like, okay, I'd like to grow, where are your hydrangeas? And they're like, no, girl, like you're not going home with hydrangea or dahlias. I used to love growing dahlias. And they're like, absolutely not. You're not growing dahlia here in the summer. And it's like they won't let me leave. I mean, they don't sell it, but also
Yeah.
they explain, okay, well, if you like the dahlia, then why don't you try going for this variety instead of a zinnia? Or if you like, like, I don't know, they've encouraged me to go towards more native pollinators here. And
Yeah.
it's so important. You might get lucky at a big box where you get a local gardener who's in the garden section who'll give you that advice, but it's a much larger risk, sadly.
Hmm.
Why do you think there's been such a interest on the gardener side and demand on the gardener side for native plants? Increase in Google searches on natural garden, naturalistic gardening, native gardening. What do
Hmm.
you think is behind this trend?
I think probably a lot of things, but in some ways it's just sort of common sense. Like particularly in a place like LA, where you have lawns. Like most American cities, there's lawns, but unlike a lot of American cities, to keep those lawns green, it requires just enormous amounts of water, and that water is imported from hundreds of miles away. So it's just a much more resource intensive proposition there, but it's still the norm. And so when you're told like you can save a ton of water and money by removing your lawn and putting native plants in, that's just like a financial incentive for people.
Hmm.
I think it just makes sense. And by the way, when you're doing that, you're also creating habitat and supporting pollinators, supporting biodiversity. So it's sort of a no brainer. It's like, oh, I can use less water and have butterflies and hummingbirds in my garden. Like, yeah, instead of just this lawn that nobody walks on that's doesn't even
Hmm.
look good because it's too hot and too dry. So part of it's just like, it just makes sense if you stop and think about it. Like, this is obviously the right thing to do.
Hmm.
Part of it is, I think there's a response to an environmental crisis that we're in, or I would say multi pronged environmental crises, with climate change and biodiversity loss and extinction being two of the main ones, and habitat loss. So, more and more wildlands are being developed and destroyed. And if we don't replace those some way, then we stand to lose a lot of biodiversity. We're already in that extinction. So you can pretty easily rebuild it. And I think with gardening, what's so interesting about it as an industry is that every industry has its own ecological footprint and environmental footprint of its supply chain, and how are the materials to make whatever the product is extracted, and what's the cost of shipping and all that stuff. Gardening has that too, but unlike another product like shoes or cars or whatever else, the product that you're installing is the environment itself. So, whatever you decide to put out there on the landscape is actually going to become the environment, whether it's artificial grass lawn or a thriving pollinator meadow. You get to decide what the product is. So you have sort of two opportunities to be environmentally conscious in landscaping, with where the material is coming from, and then what are you actually putting back out on that plot of land that you're going to be gardening on. So in some ways, it's like the ultimate way to express environmentalism. If you are privileged to have a place where you can garden, to try to give back to the environment through that, you can have a big impact. And I think people recognize that, and it feels good to participate in it, and it's fun. I mean, that's another aspect. There's a lot of community embedded within it, and as
I grew milkweed this year for the first time. Me and my neighbors, we were dying,
Yep.
like seeing
Yeah.
all the monarch caterpillars, and I got really into it. I got like a way station to protect them, and then I would set them free, and everyone would be, I mean, it was so fun. So one of your kind of mottos, and you gave a talk on this at Northwest Flower and Garden Show, is like co-designing with nature. When you're a gardener too, not just when you're, in charge of a 140 acre reserve. What's behind that? Like if I wanted to kind of employ that in my own garden, how do I think about nature as my co-designer?
Yeah. Well, there's a number of ways. And so the talk that I gave at the Northwest Flower and Garden Show was called "If a Tree Falls, Leave It."
Yeah, great title.
Thank you. And it was really literally about a tree that fell that we left in the garden, which is part of the practice at Bloedel Reserve as part of our aesthetic. If you've been in the Northwest, if you've been in any forest, really, you'll see fallen trees. What's different about the Northwest is because it's so wet here, they just pretty quickly get covered with moss, and then other plants start growing on them, and this whole ecosystem can emerge on like what they call nurse logs. So you'll see all these logs in the woods that are covered in salal and ferns and all sorts of native plants. So we've had a practice in a kind of a formal horticultural setting of leaving fallen trees within our garden, and we don't always leave them. If it's unsafe, if it's crossing a path, if it's in a a highly manicured area, we won't leave them. But in many cases we do, and we just sort of do some subtle tweaks, like maybe removing some of the branches, or like the smaller branches, or maybe doing some soil work. It's kind of making it look a little bit more intentional, and that creates a lot of habitat, and it creates a lot of beautiful stuff too. So we have examples of like root flares where the tree has fallen and then all the soil is washed off the roots, and all of a sudden you have this incredible sculptural display of that you don't normally see. I mentioned the nurse log. Like that's something that we not only let nature take its course, but we also sometimes will plant logs with other plants, whether they're native or just interesting horticultural plants. So that's one example. And I'll say a couple more like Northwest specific ones, and then I'll try to zoom out to just like general ideas about what this concept means for me. Obviously, not everybody has a garden big enough. If a tree falls, that they might have to get rid of it, and that totally makes sense. But you can leave certain elements and maybe some things. So a couple more Northwest related ones, like snags, standing dead trees, such an important part of the habitat here. They create habitat for insects. Those insects feed woodpeckers. Those woodpeckers create cavities that other birds will nest in. We're in sort of the land of mushrooms here. So these standing dead and fallen dead logs become habitat for mushrooms, which just adds a whole other interesting kind of experience of the garden, particularly in a season when there's not much going on, like November, December. All the summer blooms are gone. The winter blooms haven't started yet, but you have this amazing display of mushrooms. So it's almost like another season is extended if you have places for mushrooms to grow. But when we talk about like co-designing with nature more broadly across the country, I think it's really about tuning into the wild ecology of your local environment. So if you're in Florida, go spend some time in the wild natural areas and see what plants are growing there and what does the stone look like there and how does water move through the landscape. And then just having that sort of in the back of your mind and like almost through osmosis, trying to bring some element of that into how you think about your own garden at home, whether it's bringing in some native plants, whether it's choosing to use local materials, local stone rather than imported stuff from the box stores. Maybe it's like looking, I see there's a lot of kind of swampy depressions in the natural environment here. I'm going to put some rain gardens in that sort of mimic that. So it's really like using an eye towards the environment you're in as a way to think about how you garden there.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you're reframing what homeowners would take as problems and seeing them as opportunities instead. So
Yes.
I want to throw one at you. I just
Okay.
bought a house and
Congrats.
thank you. I mean, this is beside the point, but I cannot get over the soil in Florida. I mean, my front yard is sand. It's wild. But also, we have this enormous oak tree that has an enormous branch over the roof of our house to the point that we have to take this branch down or we can't get home insurance, or our home
Mm-hmm.
insurance is going to be very expensive until we have to take it down.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to take, so the tree is staying, but we've got to
Mm-hmm.
take this epic branch down.
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest? How could I reframe this? Should I keep the wood? Should I inoculate
Yeah.
it? Should I turn it into wood chips and use it as mulch? Like, how could I use this mentality instead of just like hiring the tree guys to come over, cut it down, and like schlep it away?
Yeah. Chip it and get rid of it. Yeah. So there are so many ways you could use a big oak branch in your garden. Think about like, I don't know if you have any topography, but retaining walls, raised beds, using a branch as the, part of a pathway or part of a wall. Like it will, if you do it well and with intention, it will look both natural and also designed and curated. And you'll be saving a lot of, carbon. Your carbon footprint will be less because you're not shipping it, you're not driving it, you're leaving it on site. And things like just building berms of it. If you have a flat garden, adding some topography and mounds and like hugelkultur berms, they can really like kind of make give you different microclimates to garden in and give you just a little bit more visual, the like a little bit more going on visually if you have some height. So one way is just to save them, create, pile them up and then cover it in soil. And then you have kind of this new thing to plant and it will change and ebb and flow through time.
That's
I
kind of
don't,
cool.
yeah. And I think like one of the things that our team does really well here at Bloedel Reserve is use materials like that to edge paths. So if there's a path that needs to be like bermed up or graded up, yes, you could go to your Home Depot and get some of those little scalloped paver blocks and
Pavers,
stick
yeah.
them in. Or you could use a beautiful oak branch and it's going to look so much more interesting to the eye. And it also will be saving resources, saving material, potentially creating habitat. I don't really know what the ecology of your area is like, but I wouldn't be surprised if.
I don't know if I want to make more habitat for snakes, but I understand what I understand.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you got to balance it. There's always
Yeah.
like ideas, and it doesn't mean that it has to be like just a jumbled, messy pile. It can be done very artfully. If you look at like natural sculpture, you'll see all these incredible. There's something just really catching to the eye of taking something really wild and natural and kind of putting it in a slightly more human context. And then you'll be, evoking where you are and not just the long-term kind of ecological history of where you are, but the short-term cultural history as well. Like, so this applies to things like that. Like if you're moving plants instead of chopping them down and starting from scratch, like if you have a plant that you can move around, why not? You're saving that. And I mean, I could go into all sorts of ways that,
Yeah, I'm
that.
curious, like, because you have these incredible resources at Bloedel Reserve. Yet, I think a lot of the things you're talking about are actually extremely applicable to a home garden. So, what are other examples like that you started saying, like with the tree, but what are other examples that you guys have been able to kind of execute at a high level at Bloedel, but we could potentially take inspiration for? I think one thing you just named is huge is stop throwing your plants out for every season. That like breaks my heart when I see the landscapers with the piles of healthy plants on the side
Hmm.
of the road or the trucks full of healthy plants just because it's a seasonal refresh. So replanting elsewhere I think is a really great. Obviously we talked about buying native plants, buying local, using your lost, your fallen trees. What other like examples do you have that we might be able to be inspired by?
Well, I think some of them are really like Northwest like specific to what happens in the Northwest. So our moss garden is just like
That's
this.
great. We have plenty of listeners in the Northwest.
Okay. Yeah, so I think like Darren Strange is our gardener who takes care of our moss garden, and he's been doing it for many years and has kind of just created this pretty incredible landscape. And a lot of it in the Northwest, like moss will just come in and take over if you create the right conditions. One of the things that he told me is that he actually doesn't at this point really plant much himself. What he does instead is he lets nature put a few seedlings here and there, and he selects which ones he wants to survive and curates rather than kind of top down, I'm going to draw this out on a piece of paper and here it is. It's a conversation over many years of, hey, this is getting a little bit too shady here. This tree is kind of senescing. I'll let it go. This would actually be nicer with a little shade, and there's the seedling coming in. I'm going to encourage that.
Wow, that's a really cool reframe as well. Is seeing what nature drops in your lap and shaping it instead of having the God complex of will design and execute this to my liking,
Yeah, it's almost like humbling yourself to what wants to be there too. And in some ways, it can be easier because the things that are doing well and expressing themselves, you allow to thrive. And I've always been interested in that type of gardening, like whether it's natives or ornamental plants. Like put a bunch of perennials and just let them sort of do their thing and see what happens. And it does require, I think, some homework on learning your plants and learning, when you have to cut something back or how you can kind of get something to flush a little more growth. So there's definitely all sorts of lifelong learning that you can do in these styles. But yeah, I think it's really comes down to not only the gardening practice, but kind of retraining our eyes for beauty. I think that's really like almost sort of like at one of the deep levels of what this conversation is about is what do we as people find beautiful, and is it the pansies that have been switched out overnight so that they're all blooming again the next day, or is it a tree that's been beautifully pruned over 80 years? What is it? We have to kind of decide. And I think part of the thing that I am interested in is how do we train our eye to see beauty in things that the garden industry has historically kind of thought were ugly. And I'll give a few examples. In California, the big complaint about native plants is that they go dormant in the summer. So you'll have July hits, the rains have been gone for a while. All of a sudden, your lush springtime garden with flowers is pretty brown, and the leaves that still are there are kind of shriveled, and they've gone from a dark vibrant green to like a chalky lime green, and that is historically considered ugly by most people. And I've just kind of wondered why that is. You don't go to the forest and in the Northeast in the middle of the winter and expect there to be leaves and flowers. That it's winter. It's wintertime, so you're kind of like, okay, this is just the season that we're in. So one of the projects that I was really kind of interested in when I was in California was to try to promote a love for the dormant season and an embrace of the seasons of California. And another example, and it's hard for me because I did very kind of formal horticultural training where like every pruning cut had to be perfect and you couldn't leave any dead wood. And I've had to kind of take that and in some ways abandon it and say, actually leaving some of that dead wood on the ground is going to create habitat for insects, or not picking up every leaf is probably better for the ecology of the site. So it's a lot about reframing what we find beautiful. And I think that's a project with the whole.
That's it. That's the challenge for the next 2 decades of gardeners, I think, and everyone, right? Like, I think this also mass interest in native plants and naturalistic gardening is also coming from like a mass awakening of our society being like, holy shit, we have fucked up our planet so bad, and someone has to fix it, which I think is very interesting. How would you suggest, and once again, I'm a great example of this because I'm in a very new territory, but even for people who have been in their own territory, but maybe they're used to planting like whatever the neighbors are planting and it's like not that native. How do you suggest retraining your eye for that beauty? In Florida, I'm in a new area where I don't recognize or know the names of any of the landscape plants because I didn't have any of them in Zone 5B. So sometimes I don't even know where to start. I get overwhelmed. How do we retrain our eye?
I think it starts with spending time in natural habitats.
Yeah.
So just look up on Google Maps, where's your nearest natural preserve and go there. Most places in the country have native plant societies and community groups that you can be a part of that will take you out and teach you. And then your tools now on phones, I hate to say it, you can, as someone who spent a lot of years learning to identify plants, that
Mm-hmm.
information is pretty much obsolete now because you can just snap a picture
Yeah.
of a plant and it'll tell you what it is. But I think in some ways our eyes are already trained. Like we go to, you go to the Everglades, you go to the deserts of the Southwest, you go to the forests of the Northwest, you go to the fall foliage in New England. These are natural ecosystems and environments that are just stunningly beautiful to us, and we don't need to be trained for that. Like everybody knows the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is beautiful. Yosemite is beautiful, and the plants there are part of the beauty. But we just think of human spaces as very distinct
And separate.
and separate. And I think when I go to a new city, like the first thing I want to do is go see what does the wild landscape look like around here. What are the wild plants here, and what's happening in the most kind of natural way. And I think a lot of people find beauty in that. They just don't think that could be their garden or that could be a space within a city, but it can.
Yeah.
And I would argue it makes the world so much more interesting because if you go to a typical American strip mall or cul-de-sac neighborhood, it's going to look almost exactly the same. The plant choices are different, but it's pretty similar looking from region to region. And so the thing that really makes a place unique and special, you can capture through this style of gardening. But to answer your question, I think it really starts with spending time in nature. Every region is going to have its own books. iNaturalist is a great app that just has all your ecology on it. So there's so many resources now. It's so much easier than it was 20 years ago to kind of get into it. And I also think the community has grown. So it's not only a good thing to do, but it's a really good way to just build community and make friends. Like most regions have some more than others, but most regions have kind of a group of people who are into this and you can be part of that. And it's just a cool way to get to know people and get to know your community.
I think it's interesting. Yeah. And like every local botanical garden now has a native section. You know what I mean? It's not just the orchidarium under glass. Like and I think people will be shocked at once they open their eyes. Once they say, okay, I'd like this, they're going to be shocked at how much is available to them. And it's funny because you were talking about how you got started at the aquarium, and I think about my local region in Jupiter, Florida. We have massive sea turtle conservation, and there's like a whole sea turtle conservation area where, they're making sure the baby sea turtles get into the ocean. That's an ecosystem in itself, right? That they're working on preserving. So like you might show up for the sea turtles, but you're totally going to get an education on, beach scape. I don't know actually what even the name of like the sea grapes, the bluff, whatever it is where the sea turtles live.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think also like if you don't have a native plant society, maybe you have a native, turtle society that you can go and you'll probably learn something.
Totally. And there's so many resources. And what you mentioned before about your neighbors getting interested in the milkweeds, that's such a common story that I've heard from people, particularly time in Los Angeles. There's a lot of, it's not always the most friendly place. People are, it's a big city. It's kind of anonymous. You can spend years.
And everyone's homes are so like insulated, or isolated is what I'm looking for.
Very isolated a lot of time from your car to your office to your car to your house, a lot of screens. But I've heard time and time again from people who spend time in their front yard gardening that it really like builds community and people are coming, and particularly this type of kind of ecologically minded gardening. If you have like a bunch of butterflies just flying around your milkweeds, people are going to stop. They're going to talk to you. They're going to
Who doesn't want that?
Yeah. And you're going to become more deeply enmeshed in your community through that. So it's just a way it's almost like reclaiming our humanity and our relationship to the environment through gardening. I think it's really it gives you that opportunity to be present and alive. Yeah.
100%. I mean, I also find something that I was surprised with at Northwest Flower and Garden Show last year when I like look high level at what's talking to me, what's going on. Like to me, and I'm curious to hear if you thought this too, like when you looked at all of the design installations, Whimsy was it. Like all of these installations, I would say there's 20 installations. I would say 17 of the 20 installations were like anchored in whimsical forest thing that was not present last year.
Totally.
I think we are yearning because like the world is on fire so bad that like we're yearning for this whimsical connection, and like what is more whimsical than a butterfly or a hummingbird? Like, there isn't anything. Like, if
Yeah.
you can be the house on the block that has the butterflies and the hummingbirds, like, you're going to be everyone's friend. And also, it's going to bring you so much joy. It's going to reconnect you. Like, that monarch experience last year, I'm 36. I was 35, I guess, when it happened. Like, I was a 7-year old. I was a seven. I have not experienced awe like that in a while. So tell us more about Bloedel Reserve. How do we get to you? How do we visit you? What is there to expect if people were to come? Obviously, we'll link to everything in the show notes, but tell us more about what your time has looked like there.
Yes. So we're 140-acre garden, as we mentioned. It's a mix of wildlands and cultivated landscapes. It's on
I think
Bainbridge
your
Island.
motto is garden within a forest. That's such a
Yes.
cool
Yeah.
tagline. Yeah.
Yeah, that is our motto. So Bainbridge Island is basically directly west of downtown Seattle, and there's a ferry, which is like I learned when I moved here that the ferries of Seattle are like almost like the subways of New York. Like there's just a way of life out here.
Yes. Iconic.
Yeah, and so you can take a ferry. It's about 25-minute ride from downtown Seattle to Bainbridge Island, and then we are about a 10-minute drive from the ferry terminal. There's also public transportation, which will get you here. So we're really easy to get to from Seattle. You can also, and yeah, I mean, we're open Tuesday through Sunday. Pretty much every day of the year. We're closed for a few holidays, but mostly we're always open. There's something different in every season. We're just kind of starting to get into spring right now. You know, we've got the first flowers are really starting to come online, and a lot of the trees are budding out. So it's just a beautiful time right now, and we're about to hit this incredible fever pitch of spring that will, but that will just be pretty stunning here. And what I love about the Northwest is the spring kind of like it's a really just like long spring, and it's this long kind of misty cool spring, but because of that the flowering season just goes and goes and goes, and it unlike the east where it sort of explodes into spring, it's like we have this long drawn out spring. Like we already have cherries blooming, camellias have been blooming for over a month now, and it's we're about to
What's the thing that's always all over the show and it makes me so jealous? It's not anemones, it's not ranunculus.
I'm not sure what that would be, but
You have
yeah,
so many beautiful flowering options in your spring that the
we
rest
really
of
do.
the country don't get. It's like so amazing.
No, we're spoiled here, yeah, and it's kind of crazy because you can grow like very temperate, like trees from the Northeast or stuff that you'd see in New York City. You can grow like manzanitas and California lilacs from California. The diversity of
Lavender.
You can grow lavender, you can grow rosemary. You can really get away with both some of the drier stuff because of our dry summers, along with all the wet stuff. So it's pretty amazing. And Bloedel is a great place to see diversity. We have certain gardens that are really about that kind of botanical diversity. You'll see the natural native landscape. And what's really important is you'll see it all blended together like really well. I think that's what's so special about Bloedel is the kind of sequence of like open meadow landscapes to forest to open to Japanese garden to moss garden to rhododendron glen. They're really carefully kind of integrated. So the experience of going through the property in these distinct garden zones is really surprising at times. And you'll enter like this feature that you're like, whoa, that's so cool. There have been a number of landscape architects who have worked on different projects here throughout the years. And we really pride ourselves on excellent maintenance. I feel like the gardens are super well maintained here. The
And a
paths are
great
really,
source of
yeah.
inspiration for anyone local
Yeah.
gardening. It's like let
Yeah.
Bloedel forget Pinterest, like let Bloedel be your Pinterest or let nature be your Pinterest, you know?
Yes, yeah. Let unexpected things delight and surprise you, which is basically
Yeah.
what we have here. You'll see one more thing about this idea of falling trees and letting them become part of the landscape. We have gardeners here at Bloedel who've seen the whole cycle of a tree falling, landing on the ground, and then deteriorating away and decomposing till it's not even visible anymore. And then that's happened within their tenure as gardeners. We have gardeners who've been here over 40 years. So that long time kind of relationship it's a really beautiful thing. And to see it and get inspired for your own home garden and the space that you spend time in and that you can develop this relationship with, I think that's what I hope Bloedel can give to people.
So beautiful. Well, we'll link to everything in the show notes. Thank you for this kind of headier. When I originally thought I was going to have you on, I was like, this is going to be a very like the do this, and this. But this was a really nice kind of heady conversation with you about nature and gardening. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
Growing